Is this a roof that came down? What are we looking at here? 20 meters?
History has shown us great military builders have emerged from the ranks of the Prussians, the French, and Dutch builders over the last 150 years. Amazing fortress designs, new evolutions and innovations have emerged only to be redesigned and upgraded later, especially before World War I. Unfortunately, I will never run out of great forts to show you from these centuries. However, of course, the newest steel, cement, and rebar constructions of the pre-World War II bunkers and fortresses, where a whole new evolution took place to match the newest developments in artillery and the emergence of aerial drop bombs. And given the wartime history of the past two world wars in Western Europe, and the access we've always enjoyed to these, combined with the historical information of these during the Cold War, this has left the impression on most that most of this evolution and construction took place here. And that would be entirely wrong. During this season, I will begin to show you what amazing forts and constructions were built in the East, in Poland and Ukraine. And some have truly left me in awe. Now, you may think that pre-World War I forts in France and Germany are special, and they are. But just you wait until you see what the Russians and the Poles were doing here in Poland. It takes the term large and well-built to a whole new level of fortress construction. And following that tradition in the East, I'm going to introduce you to all the many, many lines of fortifications and bunkers here. From before 1914 through the wars of 1920, 1939, 1941, and well into the Cold War. What the Polish and Russians constructed is simply amazing, and it would give the German Regelbauten a run for its money on cement anyway. Let me just recap the past 200 years in Poland, a time period where everybody at one point fought a war with everybody else, including, of course, civil wars. And when they could, they would build forts and bunkers, fortified lines of defense to prepare for the next war or uprising. But let's, for the sake of greatness, start with Napoleon. Having taken possession of a large part of Poland, he set out to build a vast military installation surrounded by forts just outside Warsaw. Here he wanted to build a huge garrison and granary storage. However, as the Russians were not particularly keen on learning French, they ejected Napoleon's armies from the Russian territory. Soon after, he was sent into exile, whereafter Russian engineers now looked at his plans for Modlin, and completely in line with Russian tradition of always thinking big, they actually constructed the largest garrison building in the world and a ring of forts surrounding it. Modlin Fortress in itself amazing. Constructed, fortress site began in 1807. Initially it was intended for supply storage for the field armies, the casemates, earthworks, 5 bastions, all designed by Napoleon. By 1810, it was decided by him to create it into a huge fortress. So large, the Duchy of Warsaw actually considered giving it its own city charter. By 1811, over 19,000 people was working on the construction, with the French intending to construct 3 semi-independent fortifications here, with the main lines of defense to be located on the banks of the Vistula and Narew River, with bastions about 1,000 meters from the main fortification to reinforce the defenses against the newest types of artillery. However, the fortress was unfinished as Napoleon was defeated in Moscow. And now the Duchy of Warsaw and the Poles took it over. Not too keen on learning Russian, they faced 36,000 Russian soldiers who arrived there on February 5th, 1813, and laid siege to the fortress, which inevitably fell that December. Now, the area, as did half of Poland, finds itself incorporated into the Russian Empire. A small mixed unit of Russian and Polish soldiers occupied the fortress, with little new construction done until 1830, where during the November uprising the Poles rose up against the Russians. And by the way, you will find that the Poles are not easily subdued, and quite a number of uprisings mark their history. It leaves a calendar rather double-booked. However, thereafter, the Russians, now facing a hostile population and the possibility of war from the west as well, began to construct fortresses, one large citadel in the center of Warsaw, full of artillery which could cover the entire city, with some of the largest buildings with huge earthworks that I've seen. And Modlin, it grew. It eventually became the longest building in Europe, just under 2,500 meters long. A gigantic fortified barrack building, with all logistics of kitchens, running water, the courtyard for men and horse, with a huge granary eventually would spring up, which could also be defended. It is one of the most stunning constructions of Modlin, designed by Polish architect Jan Jakob Gay, constructed in 1844. It now stands in ruin, after first being bombed in 1939, but subsequent fires wrecked the building. However, from 1841, the construction of Modlin slowed and ceased for almost 40 years, until 8 more forts were constructed in the years 1883 to 1888. Eventually, before World War II, the Polish Tank Corps, which would be stationed in one of the parts of the long building with their tankette repair shop inside as well. Also, huge observation towers and water towers were constructed. It was now surrounded by military infrastructure, ramparts, gun positions, guarding their approaches to Warsaw. It even had its own airport. And even the laundry building for the huge garrison, in its own right, a stunning piece of architecture. However, with the defeat of Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, this caused Russia to begin to rethink their strategy. And this is where things begin to get interesting. The new defense minister, Vladimir Sukhomlinov, pointed out that it was time to dismantle the large fortresses and the citadel, as both were obsolete by now, which they were, all outdated in the face of new artillery. However, as Russia is a state of mind, he was overruled by his upper-class superiors, who instead threw 800 million rubles at upgrading the old fortress, with more outer forts and more heavy artillery. It was to be a huge fortress, designed to be one last holdout bastion in the face of a possible German assault, being overrun and surrounded. And in 1912, the real new innovations began here, something the world had never before seen, and this construction would continue until Ludendorff's armies were within artillery range in 1915. Russian engineers had watched and learned from the first year of World War I in the West, watching the pre-war Belgium and French forts being dismantled by German artillery. They took note and had begun constructing something special, something the world of war had never really before seen. And not only is the string of 19 forts surrounding Modlin mostly still there, they were also all constructed completely individual, all test beds for new technology, designs, and some fixes. Some older forts were also reinforced, but others were constructed in ways I've only seen during the Second World War. And when the German army fell on Fortress Modlin after a stunning series of advances and hard-fought battles, some of the forts were not even completely finished or had their steel domes installed. So let me show you just what the Russians were doing and where they were taking their construction efforts a year into the First World War, making these the newest forts, most modern of the First World War. Now, I'm not sure if Hitler had taken any inspiration from these when he envisaged Wolf's Lair, but he might as well have done. We're going to start with a classic for the time, remnants of 3 Russian forts and Janovec belonging to the outer defensive ring of Fortress Modlin group. These are prime examples of modern solutions in the late Tsarist fortification scheme. The group consisted of the older brick and earth fort number 4 from 1887 and 2 newer concrete fortifications built between 1912 and 1915, but this was the concept structure they were going to use. 1 older and 2 newer cement forts in groups of 3. Well, that's how it turned out anyway, as a compromise, given what the new Minister of War wanted, but as he was overruled and had to compromise, so in 1912 the construction of the second outer ring of forts around Modlin began. The new forts were numbered 9 to 18, and the immediate works D1 to D10. At the same time, another modernization of older forts was started. Thus, the 3 fort groups here was established.
Now you think this may just be another piece of trees sitting out here in Poland. You have no idea what I'm about to show you. It damn well better blow your mind.
Fort B9 was built in the form of defensive barracks, 500 meters north of Fort 4. It was to be equipped with an armored observation turret. They were attacked by the German Army, 169th Infantry Brigade, and the Germans occupied the forts after the Russians had left them on the night, August 17 to 18.
If this is the ceiling, then we're coming up here. It's about 20 meters. This should give you an idea that we are not looking at a late 19th century fort. The construction of this started in 1913 and it continued into 1915. That would make this the most modern fort of the First World War. Now the Germans started their attack here in 1915, but look at this. This is reminiscent of everything we see in the Second World War. This is absolutely massive in construction. Now the hooks and chains hanging from the ceiling is because people have used it for rappelling training, nothing to do with the war. This is amazing for World War I. This is just, and you see the steel door that was placed here, even to the point where the door sill is still here, is almost one piece. I'm obviously going to go in here because I can, barely. But this is the most massive construction I've seen that was involved in World War I. This, and the Russian built this. Russian built, German destroyed. A story we've heard before, but cement and rebar, World War I construction, lots of rebar. They must have made the plan on this before the Belgian forts that were not reinforced were destroyed. But they must have known and adjusted, which is almost impossible to think that they adjusted this to incorporate rebar and steel if they didn't have this thought from the beginning. It's not like you can insert rebar into a half-finished fort. Is this a wall that is lying down? Is this a roof that came down? What are we looking at here? 20 meters? This will be the ceiling, the roof thickness. This is World War II. This is World War II dimensions in every which way. All right, so here you see the roof that has come down, that is connected to this. We're looking at 8-10 meters of cement with steel rebar inside. And that's why it came down in chunks. There's not rebar through all of it, but this is still serious. Look at the dimensions of this. So, all right, so here we're having ventilation or drainage that was running inside the bunker here. You call it a fort. Okay, we call it a fort, but this is just... This would put Hitler's bunker to shame. You come in here, you see the steel rebar. That this was built in 1915 is mind-blowing. I mean, the Germans would really... I don't think a 420 could penetrate this. I honestly don't know how they destroyed it. Although, that was definitely a hit. If this was... It is possible that this is the ceiling that has bent down, and this was a impact from top. But, I mean, whatever this was, you see, it did nothing. At the very least, it was a 75. It was probably 100 or 150. But it did nothing to the fort. Yeah, shrapnel damage. But just look at this. This is just... It's just absolutely insane. I have got to see what else the Russians built in this time, because, wow. I'm imagining this was an interior wall, but it's really hard to see until we get up or fly over it. But this must have been an interior wall. And if this was an interior wall, then this impact was somehow inside on this. This was... This is really hard to piece together. I mean, holy hell. This looks like this was an addition to above the original ceiling, and this was the original ceiling. So if I'm reading the structure here correctly, this was the ceiling, and these two slid down when the bunker deconstructed, but this place stayed up, almost as if it was built or laid in plates. It's very hard to tell at this point without having a specific knowledge of how this was designed. And since I have absolutely no point of reference, because I have never in my life seen anything like this, and neither has, I presume, most people. There's weatherproofing on this cement. So, gonna walk the lip. This almost looks like there's a rampart for soldiers to stand in this direction, firing to my right. But just look at this massive thing. I think this was a walkway for soldiers. This is one slab of a roof panel, about 10 meters thick, and the smaller one was another slab laid on top of it that had slid down when it was demolished. And I'm wondering if this was not actual destruction from the inside after the fort was taken, because I don't think there's anything the Germans had during the First World War that will be able to destroy this fort with direct or indirect fire. I just don't see that as an option. So this looks like this was the original intended construction. 10 meters of heavy cement and stone. And then they put on top the sections with cement and rebar. This is the reinforced part. they added to it. That's why it was able to slide when it was blown. But just the original construction is massive. It's almost incomprehensible to think.
Most likely, the retreating Russians blew up important elements of the fortifications. However, this is not quite clear, given wartime reports that the Russians did not have enough explosives to do the job. But as we can see here, Fort B9, blown up by somebody, it certainly was. But that makes it possible to see what was inside the construction.
Where did that impact come from?
Let's take a look at the battle itself. After a fierce battle and advance of the German army towards Warsaw, the Modlin Novogeorgievsk was surrounded by the 10 August, and the bombardment began a few days later and was concentrated on the northeastern portion of the defenses lying north of the Vistula River. The German assault was helped after the capture of the fort's chief inspector with detailed plans of the fort's defenses. After a 3-day bombardment on August 16, von Beesl's corps proceeded to storm the forts in the northeastern and eastern part of the outer belt of forts. Colonel von Fleif's brigade captured Fort 15 and 15B by 4 p.m. with 150 prisoners in them. The 10th and 38th Landwehr regiments, after stubborn battle, captured Fort 15A by 2 a.m. Attacks on Fort 15-1A and 15-1B were repulsed by the Russian garrison. Against the forts of the northeastern defensive sector, the attacks of the Germans continued. The attempt of the Russian garrison to recapture the forts of Group 15 were unsuccessful. The commander of the 455th Infantry Regiment died in counterattacks. The 21st and 5th Brigade was sent to the forts of Group 15, but their attack was repelled by the garrison. At the same time, after shelling by the forces of the 169th Landwehr Brigade, the fort of Group 14 were attacked. The commander of the sector ordered to clear the forts and retreat to the second line of defenses, wanting to blow up the fortifications. But it turned out that there was no stock of explosives in the forts, and the sappers were sent out for them but did not return. The forts fell into the hands of the Germans in complete safety. Thus the discrepancy. On the evening of August 17, the commandant of the fortress was ordered to retreat across the river to the redoubts of the main bypass of the forts. Since the airfield in Modlin was under the threat of shelling, it was decided to evacuate the vehicles with crews and burn 5 faulty ones. 9 planes, 12 officers, 5 lower rankings flew out of the fortress, with the secret files, the standard of the fortress, and the supply of golden crosses of St. George was taken with them as well. Only 1 aircraft went missing on the way. On August 18, the siege artillery of von Beesl's 10th Group was moved to new positions, closer to the second belt of forts. Several more forts were captured. The Chief of Staff of the fortress, Major General Globachev, telegraphed to the staff of Northwestern Front that there was no hope of holding the fortress. The defenses of the inner belt could last no more than a day. On August 19, fighting broke out in the second line of forts. Early in the morning, Fort 10, 11, 14 were occupied by the Germans. At Fort 2 and 3, the Russian 249th Infantry Brigade counterattacked 5th Landwehr Brigade. In the midst of the battle, the German field artillery fired all its ammunition and was nearly captured. But the heavy batteries advanced and helped repel the onslaught. By 1300 hours, Fort 1, 2, and 3 were captured by the Germans, having again moved the heavy batteries forward. The German troops captured the second line of fortifications. The defenders of the fortress on the northern bank of the Vistula had only the citadel and Zakheim left. The forts on the southern bank were not stormed, as the German troops were only approaching them. However, heavy artillery was now shelling the entire space of the citadel, destroying the fortifications. In the evening, large groups of fortress defenders began to raise white flags and surrender. Columns of German infantry approached the citadel. Communication with the fortress was interrupted. But at 2 a.m. on August 20, the commandant of the fortress, Cavalry General N. Bobier, left for negotiations with the commandant of the 10th Siege Group under von Biesler, at 4 o'clock the terms of surrender were signed. An hour later, the German artillery ceased fire. Yet this was not the last time Modlin would come under fire.
A few hundred meters from the first, the trails are starting to look sort of military-like. And after what I've just seen, this is sort of a surprise to me. This is built into foundation of this as well. And I have honestly rarely been less excited to see what's down this path. And here, once again, what do I see? Steel, rebar, cement. And we're talking World War I again. Obviously, whatever this section was, it was destroyed. But looking at this rebar, it is on the inside. This rebar is the first laid. Also here. There's rebar and stone throughout this. Ain't that just special?
The designer, General Professor Nestor Bonjicki, must have been a man with great foresight, as the central fortification of this group, Fort 17, designed on a triangular plan, had the most modern of underground communication corridors, semicircular vaulted casemates, and anti-splinter nets on the ceiling.
Don't know where to start, so I'm just going to start somewhere. In fact, these forts were so modern, they had not even been completed by the time, can you believe this? World War I had reached here. By the time of the German attack in 1915, the steel domes had not yet been put in place, but they were planned. Here's something you don't see often. You see steel rebar, cement on top of a pile of red brick. This looks like that would put in here to fill a collapsed tunnel or hole. And the interesting thing is, just to make things a little more complicated, this was also in the way when the Germans attacked in 1939. This is where the steel dome would have been. Russian, pre-World War I. Big, heavy red stone dome well. Given the vintage of this fort and this construction, or these forts, that is probably one of the most surprising things I have ever seen doing this. It is thoroughly unexpected. Something this elaborate, massive, constructed on what is theoretically the Eastern Front before World War I. You see, interesting with stone and rebar intermixed. Not just cement and rebar, but stones. I would imagine this would actually be incredibly strong, because within the cement you would have the stones to also deflect. It was surrounded by a rampart and a moat with an earth counter escarpment. This is kind of what you would expect to see from the late 19th century. However, when you get in here and you see how they really built it, well, takes on a completely different shape, doesn't it? The barracks in this generation forts were deemed rather expensive and cumbersome to build, so they didn't build them. They planned on building the barracks outside the fort for the crews to live in until the war would necessitate them moving into the fort. And that is possibly what the foundations we saw coming in was, the foundations of the barrack buildings. Now it's a residential area, and interesting to see. But this, there's a lot of features you would see in the German forts and the Prussian forts of World War I and World War II. And these, it's hard not to recognize similarities. A defensive good idea is a defensive good idea. It's just not what you sort of expected to see on the Eastern Front. I don't know why. Too many historians are too busy dissecting the battlefields of the Somme and Verdun, Belgium. Not many actually spent any time in the East, where, just like World War II, so much happened. So this came down partially, so it's an arched hallway that would lead into the ditch, I imagine. That also means we haven't seen most of this yet. I just want to look at this enormous, what is this, 5 meters? Steel rebar in the construction. And I would imagine there could have been sheet metal sheets in here. But the grooves are only there, not throughout. Could also be just natural decay. Not the thickest rebar in the world in these. In here, but it's there. And even a little dip for somebody to dip into in case a vehicle would come through. That's a very nice detail, actually. I guess this is where the construction pieces merge together and then dislodged, which this is wood, not cables. Alright, so in here it stops. The fort came down there. It would have continued there. Ooh. I can't help but to think that the Germans may have taken note and picked up on some ideas from here before their World War II constructions. It just would be hard to not expect that they had. And then we come back up here again. Now, the weird thing is, from here, direction Germany is actually behind me. So this must have been part of the little small triangular set of defenses in all directions, because if they were all on a line facing the possibility of a German advance, they're pointing the wrong way. Of course, we also have to remember that in World War I, the Germans attacked from East Prussia, and they came down towards Warsaw from the general northeastern direction. Alright, I would imagine that the first large, enormous bunker we saw might have looked something like this. Heavily reinforced, with the lip on the roof up here that's extra reinforced. And then, but not this. This is way bigger. Not everything is destroyed, so we can go inside. Firing position for the door. That definitely looks different. rebar sticking out of the walls. Ooh, this was a covered entrance. This brick in the middle was a covered entrance. Close defense here as well. To the other, the infantry entrance. There, firing positions there. Tons of rebar, much thicker than in the archway. And then one firing position there. There would have been a wall here with a door, and I can just barely see the indent of where the hinges would have been. So you would have been in here where you see a crap ton of shrapnel shredded this building. This is where you would have defended from there and there. All right, let's just see if there's a hallway or this is just simply the defense. Ooh, there's the hallway. So there's the close defensive position. And here's I would imagine there was a door here. Very heavy steel reinforced. That has been pried away. There's the other defensive position. And then we get into what is probably where one of the steel domes would have been that were not delivered. And if they had been delivered during the Second World War, the Germans would have probably taken them and stuck them on the Atlantic Wall and melted them down anyway. However, here you can see the dome well is actually intact. This is the inside ring where the dome would have been. Despite the fact that when the Germans took this place, somebody threw a grenade down here. But it's got a little fragged here. Good infantry tactics. Yeah, somebody tossed a grenade down there that exploded right here. The shrapnel didn't go much further than here. Well, I wonder if here was a door as well. I don't see why. There was supposed to have been a steel dome behind me, not really a way in, but this too looked like it's been fragged a little bit. A little dip in the wall. Defense for the entrance. Steel door. And then in here would be the fortress proper. And imagine to the left, when we get out here, there was a wall. This is parts of that wall. There was not an opening here, obviously. There was a wall that has been destroyed, and I actually can't see any remnants of it. So there would have been a large room once you came inside the fort here. And that came down resting on that. So this is part of the original ceiling. The wall that was connected here, there's no signs of it whatsoever, which is actually very interesting. And traditionally, as we all know, when it's got something to do with World War II, there's a tire in here. We always find tires when it's got World War II. And this is a massive tire, fitting that this is a massive bunker from World War I. And I'm going to keep reminding you that this was World War I, not World War II. Despite everything in our senses, as you look around at all this steel and rebar, will tell you, oh, this must be World War II. But it's not. Well, of course, it still fought World War II, quite possibly several times. 39 and 44, 45. This is the ceiling that came down. The room would have extended in under this slab. A little interior decorating will fix this. Follow the yellow brick road and see if we run into Dorothy. Oh, shit. Interesting how they laid the rebar or the form to cast this upon. Alright, watch your step. What I'm looking at, this I would think is dividing walls. They probably were the pillars underneath that wall or roof section here that slid from the explosion, and they went sideways and ended up looking like two gigantic blocks of Lego. And the other one could have been here. It never ceases to amaze me what explosives can actually do. Oh, it just got so much more fun. I see tunnels. This is amazing. So this was generally leading down the tunnel to the entrance. That gives us the fun and enviable task of finding out where it went. There are times when I say, I don't want to walk the places that are flooded. I will swim to the end of this thing if it was. So I am imagining that this was simply torn out from an explosion. I don't know what else would hollow out this section. And you see the roof is pretty rough, because the floor was elevated by stone. By 4 layers of stone floor? 4 layers of stone floor held up the foundations. Well, that's intriguing on its own. Alright. So, what's that cut out? Was bricked up at some point. Interesting cutout. If there were no caserne, no barracks in here, you would have a whole lot of creature comforts you didn't need. For instance, like, heating. I think this was where the crew was expected to sit if they were on duty but not active. And certainly that's been fragged as well. But the back wall here, just like the floor, is stone in cement. And almost thinking about this leading straight back down the hallway to the outside in one straight line, one would wonder if some enterprising German gunner didn't send a shell straight in here with a pack, or even in 39 with a tank, because it's a straight shot to the outside. That could explain the damage in this section. But from what I understand, this is the one place where the crews could actually sit and rest in between, because the barrack areas were outside, although they were practically not finished by the time the fighting broke out here. And something completely took out this floor. It's funny, what's here is what's not here. There's 4 layers of stone floor here. It even demolished, there's no signs of any single free-laying stones anywhere. Just like the outside wall that is completely missing. Somebody must have removed these stones for, I don't know, probably private construction. They incorporated them in the garden wall or something. It's just interesting that it's completely missing. And also, I am imagining that there would have been a floor above here. There almost had to have been a room or floor above here. There wouldn't have been a cathedral-like height here. There would be no reason for that, plus it would be rather unsafe. And again, there's no resemblance, no parts of that rubble either. These are firing positions, interspersed from machine guns and rifle fire above the fort. And you had the two steel domes, firing positions for infantry. Quite elaborate, quite high up actually. Massive, massive, massive. This is not what you see for World War I. Now the guardrails obviously was put on after the war so nobody would fall down while watching these. So this will be the frontal part of the firing position, and looking at the frontal part of the firing position, somebody most certainly fired upon it. That's the direct fire. That's direct fire. Those in there are direct fire. This fortress fought. This fort definitely fought. Lots of impacts on the front facade. Lots of impacts. Lots of impact. But this is a roof section. Now you see the cross section of just exactly how thick this was. And that is damn impressive for World War I. How they poured it, I would be really curious to see. And this section have come down. There's an entryway in here. We would have to walk on. What we're looking at would be the floor. That would probably be where infantry would come out and get to their positions. Like piece by piece, they poured them in sections that were separated. That's where the Germans in World War II did it differently. There wasn't going to be a split like this. They were still connected, interlaced with rebar. And there were rebar in these. So why didn't they pour the sections and still connect the rebar between them? That's sort of silly. Do you remember the World War I test fort? There's some of this in that, except this is way bigger. Yeah, the staircase goes all the way down to where the flat was. It's actually interesting. That is a little bit of a throwback to an old castle, I'll almost have to say. We would run up on your ramparts and fight. Impact. This would be the wartime exit for the soldiers to run out on their ramparts from here. And this is the tunnel where they would have been waiting. So what is missing here is a staircase. Unless the staircase is here, in which case, well, it's not. Now this room would have held a staircase and probably a landing that would have then led the troops up here and out here. This was actually a very simple fort, although there must have been some artillery emplacements as well. Lots of shrapnel, lots of direct impacts on here. This was a fighting fort. And as we close in on this old fort that was built in the late 1800s by the Russians when they owned this piece of real estate, This gets to be interesting to see how they differ from the Prussians and the French. Here's the first indication that we are closing in on something military. And for those of you who study barbed wire, well, you tell me what this is. Now, so far the construction in red brick looks fairly identical to the Prussian forts. Although the first time the Prussians laid their hands on this was when they took it from the Russians in World War I. So now we'll see what happened during World War II, because that just magically happens to be missing from the historical accounts of the fort. As for the modifications, well, there were electricity here. The Polish army did occupy it in between the wars, so there'll be some modifications have done to some extent. And somebody bricked this up to keep people like me out. They bricked it up because the tunnel behind it has actually been blown. My best bet on such a large and wide door would be for cannons have to be stored in here and rolled out here onto the ramparts, which would put us on the inner of the fort with the moat on the outside as we crossed. This is a very open, wide space, to be honest. Now, this brickwork have taken quite a lot of damage. That looks like it is not indicative of just time, but it looks very similar to Western style forts, depending of course on what this is. This could be a caserne. Could also be a powder magazine. Okay, there's I'm going to go with this up in a barracks or a caserne type thing, more so than I would believe it to be powder storage. Way too open for that, way too open for that, obviously. This must have been a barrack, like a peacetime barracks. So there's nothing, no reason why there should have been any fighting or destruction taking place here during the Second World War. And again, we don't know what this was used for during the Second World War. It's not unlike the Germans to have used this for anything from a prison or storage or production, like they did so many others. Oh, what a nice little caserne area. Speaking of electrical, there was electrical installed here. Now, when, by whom, or why, I do not yet know. It doesn't look like the traditional German setup of electrical. So this is some 430 meters by 200 meters. At least the original layout was. Oh, what have we here? We have a room. What have we here? We have another room. You would never have guessed. Interesting stackering of bricks. Lots of component for electrical on the walls. Holders. And there was a heavy door. There was two heavy doors. That would actually extend all the way into the room. That's unproductive, but okay. Maybe the same is the case here. In which case I would guess, yeah, there's some serious hinges going on here. And it looks like an electrical cable. Maybe this brickwork had been put on later. And they just left the hinges. So this would actually have been almost like a gate. Notice this is a metal pipe. I'm gonna have to go with this. I've been at least at one point, a small ammunition storage for maybe rifle ammunition, maybe. Oh, that's interesting. Never seen an exit with a little indent like that. Here by that entrance from the barracks is this mound, which would serve as a protective mound for the entrance. In later evolutions of forts, you'd start seeing cement or steel walls, kind of bunkers, protective entrances. Here, this was just simply a dirt wall, which is really a wide ditch. Seriously. There was also a caponnier here somewhere that I want to see. This space is so large, I'm almost wondering if this is an old artillery position. So if they did the same tradition of putting artillery up on the roof of the fort as the Prussians, then that will be part of that. Well, that dream I had about there being a staircase down from here has vanished. Here's no staircase. There used to be a doorway that was eventually at some point bricked up. This is a powder store. Straightforward powder store for the artillery up here. But here was where the crew or the powder would live, right next to their artillery position. Classically sandwiched by dirt mounds to either side. This is where the cannon was. It's this, and I can't help but to think this should be the ventilation, proving my point that it's a powder store. And I'm correct. There would have been a plate of some kind over here, so it wouldn't rain in, but that's exactly what it is. Into the roof. Ooh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. This goes all the way down. This goes all the way down to the ground floor. I wonder if this was ammunition lift. No. And I would almost imagine that in here, the cannon lived. Let's go see where the cannon lived and see how deep that well was, or what it was. Those big steel hinges on here. Huh. Well, curious. Huh. Ah, here it is. And here it is. And I think it was blocked at some point. This is a munition lift. Well, it used to be a munition lift. Next to a munition store in here. That makes sense. And at some point in time, they stopped using the exposed gun positions up top and sealed it up. This has undergone at least 3 different evolutions of change, which is fun when you see forts that are paddling down 3 different wars. I wonder if there's one more in here. There is one more in here. And it is, haha, I was correct. The other one was previously bricked up. Post fact, here it is, a straight shot up to the top. Lots of stuff on the walls in this. Like a significantly more than I would imagine. This really is making me think that this might have been used for something. World War II. That's ceramic. That is a ceramic pipe in the wall with a cable out. I've never seen that before. Oh no. Oh no, what am I? This is metal. That's definitely a newer evolution. These ceramic pipes, woods. Something was mounted all along this wall individually and on the other side. If I didn't know any better, I would guess that maybe there was a communication center set up in here or production. It's hard to tell, but, and that's the second we see of these, with cabling running under the floor all the way out. Something was done here that was not part of the original architecture. And then it smells a bit of burnt wood. All right. Okay. I have no idea what this is. It looks like fire used to be fire inside. It looks like an old furnace inside, but I don't know how that's possible. So the bricks are all sorted inside. What is this thing? That doesn't tell me anything. I don't know what the hell this is. I have never seen that before. More investigation will have to be done. And here, this is rubber inlay in this one. Well, the electrical, but with rubber and ceramic. I'm intrigued. I've seen one of these before as well. This intrigues me, this room. The expanse in between the forts and the ditches are just extremely wide dimensions with artillery up here on top of the fort.
In taking the Modlin fortress groups at Novogeorgsk and Warsaw, the German victory here by far surpassed the victory of Tannenberg in 1914. This is one of the most brilliant military victories in military history. By capturing such a heavily fortified fortress, defended by superior enemy forces, and taking the amount of intact materials, foodstuffs, weapons and guns as they did, the largest fortress of the Russian Empire fell in the hands of the German army, combined with 1,500 officers and over 90,000 soldiers, 1,640 guns captured, 103 machine guns, 23,219 rifles, 160,000 shells, and 7.1 million cartridges. Among the prisoners were 18 generals, while in return, German casualties were absolutely insignificant compared to the Russians. About 100 men plus were killed and missing, versus the 90,000 killed and captured in the Russian army. Now, these numbers does vary somewhat, but it's pretty clear, especially given World War I standards in the West, that the ratio was almost 1 to 1,000. Now, this stunning defeat of the Modlin Fortress group does not reflect negatively in my mind on the design of the fortresses. These were far ahead of their time, but they were not quite finished, and their use was not quite incorporated in the battle order yet, as the Russians quite simply did not know what they were sitting on had they been finished, complete and ready. Also, with the amount of supplies the Russians had stocked in the Modlin group, something that was a great surprise to the leadership and the Stavka in Moscow, since they had no idea that so much material had been hoarded and thus lost. Tells me that the Russian command was at fault here, not the design of the fortresses. Those ideas and concepts were sound. And now that you know how it all happened, I can start to show you all of these amazing fortresses and new developments and the bunkers and fortified lines that came next for the next war.
Behind me is Werner von Braun's first test stand. Down the road is Deepness nuclear reactor. Over there is the Maginot Line and all its amazing forts. I'm visiting them all and I'm bringing them to you. So I really appreciate you like, follow and share what I'm doing, trying to document all these important historical locations. And if you feel like you want to watch more pictures or documents that I use for these, go to lostbattlefields.com. And if you feel like helping me out with my travels, because gasoline and travel and airfare is expensive, my PayPal is there, protectionserviceinc.com. You are more than welcome, but you don't have to. I appreciate all your support and all your help, and I love seeing these locations, and I love bringing them to you.